bringing it all.
Let's go!
If someone is capable enough of adapting an epic in today's time, I think it has to be Christopher Nolan, and the Odyssey is proof that this man can do just about anything. I know the movie received a lot of flack even before its release, and some of it is probably fair. I went into the theater with a negative bias, and the movie proved me wrong. Yes, the dialogues have been modernized, and this is not the most accurate adaptation of the original, but Nolan stamps his signature on the movie, which comes out so perfectly that I'm inclined to say it's one of his best works. But like I said, there are some major differences and creative liberties taken by the director, and in this video, I'll explore these changes so you're better informed when you go into this movie.
We won the war.
Odysseus has been interpreted very differently. Anybody who's familiar with Homer's original work will notice this as the first and most obvious difference. Odysseus, as portrayed by Homer, is a trickster king, who's a master shapeshifter, a skilled manipulator, and a pro when it comes to disguising himself. He's a cunning man who's extremely self-absorbed and has been shown manipulating situations and people on various occasions. However, Nolan has chosen a very different approach to depict Odysseus played by Matt Damon. He almost removes the trickster part, and this Odysseus is more of a battle-hardened veteran who's repentant for some of his actions. Maybe it's an effort to be more relatable for the modern audience, as Odysseus has PTSD and suffers from flashbacks of the violence in Troy. He's racked with guilt over killing several innocent people and causing widespread destruction. That being said, he's still a problem-solving, intelligent man with gifted professional skills, and this is why he can overcome all the odds to get back home. In short, Nolan's version is a far more ethical man than Homer's Odysseus, which makes you root for him so much more. Odysseus has a very different attitude toward women and his desires. I guess this is tied to the earlier point that I just explored. Odysseus in the movie shows a very different approach toward women and the way he handles his desires, and Homer's version is a lot more unapologetic. In the original epic, Odysseus spends time with women like Circe and Calypso, and there's this casual sexual intimacy that he doesn't avoid so consciously. In fact, it's his desire and ego that sometimes override the urge to go back home, even though he always claims loyalty to his wife. The carefree aspect of Odysseus' character is largely taken away, and the movie version of Odysseus is way more restrained and faithful. He's genuinely emotionally committed to Penelope, and he wants nothing more than to head back to her. Nolan has a clearly different take on Calypso. I can assure you that Calypso will become one of your most favorite characters in the movie, and this is largely because of her demeanor that paints her as a sympathetic character who's a therapist with a lot of antidepressants for Odysseus. I don't think Homer's version bears a lot of resemblance to this, though. In the original epic, Odysseus spends 10 years in his efforts to return home, and he spends 7 of those years on an island with the irresistibly beautiful goddess Calypso. In the original text, Calypso is obsessed with Odysseus, and she wouldn't let him leave. She even promises him immortality if he stays and satisfies her every night, and he actually does this against his will. Nah, I don't buy that part of the story. Calypso doesn't understand why he still wants to return to his wife Penelope, and she tries to make him understand that she's superior in every way. Of course, he still wants to return home, and this is a core personality of Odysseus that's been highlighted more in the movie. However, what struck me the most about the portrayal of Calypso in the movie is how she's less love-struck and more sympathetic. She hands out these narcotic lotus flowers, and this makes him forget his home and the pain associated with his longing. It's also a way to cover up all of Odysseus' traumatic memories, and like I said, Calypso is one hell of a therapist. Also, when Odysseus remembers what he must do, she lets him go rather easily. Honestly, this is a change that I don't mind, because throughout the movie, you get the feeling that Nolan is trying to add more realism to the story, if that's even possible. And this brings me to my next point. The gods are not taking center stage. So when I say that Nolan has tried to give a realistic touch to this movie, I know you're probably thinking how outrageous it sounds. I mean, this is a story filled with gods and monsters and magic among mortal men, and yet Nolan is somehow successful. However, in an effort to do so, Nolan does away with something that's extremely important in Homer's version. Yes, I'm talking about the gods. And in the original text, you'll find the gods openly active and intervening. Much of it has been removed by Nolan, who tries to ground the story with more focus on humans and political forces. For instance, the Phaeacians who ferry Odysseus home after hearing his story are removed, and this simplifies the journey. Even the likes of Zeus, who's such an important character in Homer's original poem, is absent in the movie. He's the one who sends Hermes to order Calypso to release Odysseus, and puts together various other divine interventions, and Nolan has chosen to do away with all of that. Circe is a pale shadow of her ruthless original version. Now, this is not to say that Nolan hasn't done justice to the character, because Samantha Morton has done a pretty great job here. However, the Circe that Homer's poem introduced was very different from the version we get in the movie. Circe was a goddess with special powers, and she turned some of Odysseus' men into pigs. In the original poem, Hermes gave Odysseus a special potion that would protect him against the magic of Circe, and he also advises Odysseus to make her promise that she would turn his men back to humans. Oh, and before I forget, Hermes had another crucial word of advice, where he asked Odysseus to sleep with Circe because that was apparently what she really wanted. I mean, why not? Not only does this work as she transforms his men back, but he's so impressed by her treatment that he stays back an entire year and forgets all about his homecoming for a while. The film version has no such intentions, and Circe is not seeking out Odysseus to sleep with him. It's more symbolic of what he and his men have done, as they are shown as greedy pigs. I have to admit that the movie version is a lot more mature, and this is one of the reasons why I keep saying that Nolan's version is just about as good as it gets. The escape from Circe plays out differently. I've already spoken about Nolan's attempt to stay away from all the random divine interventions and godly appearances that you can find in the poem. For instance, in the original text, Odysseus needs help from the messenger god Hermes, who gives him a special herb named moly, and this makes him immune to the magic of Circe. The film doesn't introduce Hermes at all, and instead you see Odysseus himself figure out the escape plan and threaten Circe's sister to get the job done. Also, it's interesting to note that Circe does have a sister in Greek mythology, and her name is Pasiphae, but she does not feature in Homer's Odyssey as a crow. A simpler version of Cyclops. I'm choosing my words carefully here because the movie version of Cyclops is not really about being better or worse than the original, it's just simpler. Homer's Cyclops was a lot more cunning and shrewd, and this was almost a nod to Odysseus' manipulative ways. Odysseus asks for help from the giant Cyclops Polyphemus when he comes across the monster in the cave. However, Polyphemus attacks them, and after blinding him, Odysseus escapes and says that his name is Nobody, so that when the Cyclops recounts this event, everyone would think that he has lost his mind when he says, "Nobody injured him." In every way, Nolan's take on Cyclops is simpler, and the movie version is a lot less vocal. There's no conversation between him and Odysseus, and the whole nobody trick is missing. The way I see it, Odysseus in the movie is less of a schemer and more of a survivor, and the whole thing just fits into the narrative. The mysterious sea people. In the movie, you'll find repeated mentions of the sea people, and these are a mysterious, marauding force that raid villages and destroy coastal cities across the Mediterranean. Penelope and the others fear them as a great danger that defies Zeus's laws of hospitality, and the scale of their destruction and brutality signifies the collapse of a civilization. Nolan uses this idea very smartly later in the movie, when Odysseus realizes that he and his Greek raiders at Troy are not very different from these people from the sea. It acts as a mirror for all the war crimes that he and his men indulged in. The original text has no mention of the sea people, but it does talk about various kingdoms like Egypt, Crete, and others. But there's an instance where Odysseus tells Eumaeus about a sea raid on Egypt, and many historians have later inferred that this might be a reference to a real late Bronze Age sea raiding. The relationship between Penelope and Telemachus has been modernized. This is one of the major changes made in the movie, and it's in line with how society has changed with time. When Homer's epic poem was created, it was a regressive and patriarchal society, and there are instances where Telemachus berates his mother and orders her to her chambers to resume weaving. This condescending attitude toward his mother is completely absent in the movie, and Nolan has reversed the roles, where Penelope is the one who talks down to Telemachus at times about his immaturity. I think this has more to do with Nolan's portrayal of strong female characters, and Penelope is not the submissive woman that you might have seen in the original. Humanizing the gods. One change that will probably stand out the most when you watch the movie is how Nolan has managed to humanize the gods. Firstly, he doesn't have too many instances of gods appearing as frequently as they did in the poem. The likes of Zeus, Poseidon, Ino, and Heracles are missing in action, and even the gods that you see in the movie are more human than anything else. I see this as a deeper study of the guilt-ridden human psyche and consciousness because Odysseus has a lot on his plate, and the interactions with gods only offer him the clarity that he already has deep within. Antinous and Sinon have no connection in the poem. It's part of Nolan's brilliance that he makes every character come alive. Antinous and Sinon are two such characters that are shown as brothers, and Antinous tries to take the place of Sinon even though Odysseus had told him to stay back and take care of Telemachus. Now, interestingly enough, Homer's poem has no connection between the two, and Sinon doesn't even appear in Homer's Odyssey. However, he does appear in other sources, including Virgil's Aeneid, so it's not an entirely alien character. Odysseus speaking to the dead has been altered. Odysseus is a character with a lot of depth and scope, and perhaps one of the moments that highlight him as someone greater than a mortal is his ability to interact with the dead. In the movie, you can see him interacting with Agamemnon and Tiresias, but Homer's poem has more such instances. In fact, in the original Odyssey, Odysseus speaks to his mother who died while he was away, and he also speaks to his friend and heroic warrior Achilles, who was killed during the Trojan War. Telemachus' ambush happens differently. In Homer's Odyssey, the suitors led by Antinous plan an ambush on Telemachus, who has sailed away to find more information about his missing father. Athena warns Telemachus about the attack, and he's able to bypass the trap laid for him. In the movie, this takes place very differently, and Telemachus and his trusted advisor named Mentor are ambushed by the suitors at the Temple of Apollo. Mentor is killed, and Odysseus turns out to be the savior for Telemachus, as he handles the suitors in his beggar disguise. Also, Antinous is not present during this attack, as he is back in Ithaca. Homer's version of revenge is a lot more brutal. One of the key moments in the film, something that gives you proper closure, is when Odysseus takes on the suitors single-handedly, in an intense action sequence where he kills them one after another and also sustains some serious injuries in the process. Telemachus only kills the traitorous Ichathan Melanthius, and even the slave women are spared. In Homer's version, Telemachus is far more heroic and he fights alongside his father against the suitors. I guess in his mind, Nolan made the film a lot more about Odysseus, which is reflected in the final fight sequence. The fate of the slave girls. I think this is more of a forced change than anything else because the fate of the slave girls in the original poem is rather disturbing, and definitely not suitable for the times. Back in ancient Greece, slavery was practiced, and the servants working in the palace were subjected to terrible treatment. As for the girls in question, Homer's version explores how they slept with Penelope's suitors to keep them entertained. After Odysseus comes back and kills those who pursued his wife, these girls were forced to clean up, and then Odysseus ordered them to be killed as well. Telemachus hanged them from a single rope, and this despicable act of abuse and violence was naturally omitted from the movie. Well, if it's any consolation, the narrator of the poem expressed pity for the girls who didn't really have a choice when it came to pleasuring the suitors. The closest that we have is the servant named Melantho, who's a treacherous handmaid and gets cozy with Antinous. Changes made to Athena. I've already told you about how Nolan has cut down on the role of the gods influencing the plot, as we've seen in Homer's poem. Another such example is Athena, who has a far more active role in the poem, as she assists both Odysseus and Telemachus throughout the narrative. Nolan gives a very nice shift to her character, as he presents her in the form of a girl murdered during the sacking of Troy. This is completely the director's creativity at work, and it shows how Odysseus' guilt might have manifested her. A slight alteration to the Laestrygonians. This is really a very subtle change, and you wouldn't even notice this unless you remember a little detail from the original poem. The Laestrygonians, as depicted by Homer, were a race of giant cannibals who ate some of Odysseus' men. In the movie, they're simply giants wearing medieval armor, and they attack Odysseus' men with swords. It's one of those many slight alterations that actually works for the movie. The movie missed out on a very interesting throwback. If you've read Homer's Odyssey, you might remember that it's primarily about Odysseus' journey home, and naturally it picks up after the events of the Trojan War. So while the war sequence is not part of the original text, it is brought up by certain characters across the narrative. We do get a similar flashback of the war in the movie, but what I noticed is that Nolan chose to omit a crucial detail. Odysseus was not the most enthusiastic person when Agamemnon summoned everyone to fight a war that they didn't have any real stake in. In the original narrative, Odysseus pretended to be insane and plowed his land with salt, which destroyed his fields. However, this trick didn't last, as his son Telemachus, who was only a baby then, was placed in front of the plow, and he was forced to stop in order to not hurt him, thus proving that he was stable enough. It would have been a fun addition in one of Odysseus' flashbacks, and I think it would add to his repenting personality as someone who didn't even want to fight the war in the first place. The missing part of Penelope's test. Both in Homer's poem and in the movie, you can see Penelope putting the suitors through a test, where only Odysseus passes as he's able to string his bow. This confirms his identity, and in the movie, that's all it takes. However, Homer's text had another test for Odysseus that Penelope put him through. She was still doubtful, and she asked him to remove their bed from their room. To this, he pointed out that the bed was carved from an olive tree growing in the room and could not be removed, and thus his identity as the real Odysseus was proven. The ending of the film makes a striking change. This particular change is actually in line with the version of Odysseus that Nolan tries to paint in the movie. So if you go through the original ending, Odysseus reunites with Penelope, and it's almost a happy ending until the news of the suitors killed puts Ithacans on the verge of a violent mutiny. Athena, backed up by Zeus, comes down to tell the people to stop fighting, and she wipes their memory of the event to calm things down. Finally, Odysseus plans to leave on another journey to replenish all the wealth that had been lost. In the movie, Odysseus leaves on the ship, but he's not bothered by wealth. This is a man who has done things for greed, and he's now beyond all that. He just seeks peace, and he heads west with Penelope to pay a tribute to his fallen men. All these differences are not really shortcomings, and I completely understand where most of them are coming from. A cinematic adaptation of this scale needs to be relevant to the audience of the time, and some of the things in Homer's poem might feel too outdated. Of course, there's also the vision of the director involved, as someone like Christopher Nolan would always have his own interpretation. Overall, the movie is easily one of the best of this year, and probably ranks among his best works, and I strongly recommend that you check this out on the big screen. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the movie, and also share your thoughts on the changes made from the original text. If you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.